All right, so you want the Schiff-Patel rundown, huh?
Yeah.
Well, his FBI director confirmation hearing, we've got this Fox News article that's pretty much laying it all out there.
And just keep in mind that we're dealing with a right-leaning perspective from this particular piece.
Yeah, that's a good point. We should definitely keep that in mind. So we're going to break down the most important stuff, see what both sides are saying, and try to understand what all this means for the future of the FBI, right?
Yeah, exactly. And it's a pretty big deal, too, given the current political climate.
Yeah.
The FBI director, that's a lot of power.
For sure, no doubt. So this hearing was a bit of a wild ride, but the thing that really blew up on social media was this back and forth between Senator Adam Schiff and Patel. And you're not going to believe this. It was about a song.
Yeah, I mean, it's always fascinating to me how these, personal stories and carefully chosen words, they become like weapons in these political battles.
Oh, absolutely, for sure. So Schiff, he's a Democrat, right? He's grilling Patel about this song that some of the January 6th rioters recorded. And get this, he even brings up Patel's own words from when he was on Steve Bannon's podcast. I actually have the quote here. Patel said, "So what we thought would be cool is if we captured that audio and then, of course, had the greatest president, President Donald J. Trump, recite the Pledge of Allegiance. Then we went to a studio and recorded it, mastered it, digitized it, and put it out as a song."
And I mean, it seems pretty clear what Schiff's trying to do here, right? He wants to paint Patel as being chummy with the January 6 folks, make people question his judgment, his suitability for this huge role.
Right. Makes sense. And of course, Patel's not just going to sit there and take it. He fires back, says he wasn't really involved in making the song, that he was actually trying to raise money for the families who were affected by what happened on January 6th. They even get into it about the word "we." Can you believe it?
The word "we."
Yeah. Schiff saying it implicates Patel directly, and Patel's arguing that we doesn't always include him personally. It gets pretty intense.
Wow, it's crazy how something as simple as the word "we" can turn into this proxy war for this much bigger debate about how involved Patel really was with those connected to January 6th. Both sides are fighting tooth and nail to control the narrative.
Totally. And you can imagine this whole thing explodes on social media. Conservatives are all over it, praising Patel, calling him a hero, a patriot, for standing up to Schiff. And of course, they're going after Schiff pretty hard, too.
Yeah.
Saying it was an unfair attack.
Yeah, and we saw people like Richard Grenell jumping in to defend Patel.
Yeah.
Grenell, the former acting director of National Intelligence, he was all over Twitter accusing Schiff of being partisan and petty. Just to give some context, Grenell's a pretty hardcore conservative, so his defense of Patel definitely lines up with that.
Right. And then you've got guys like Pradeep Shankar, who's a conservative commentator, and Tom Fitton, the president of Judicial Watch, that's a conservative legal activist group. They both chime in, too, questioning the Democrats' credibility, even comparing the whole hearing to a circus. It was a lot.
Yeah, I mean, this whole online reaction really highlights how divided things are over this nomination. And it shows you how these events get twisted and turned depending on what political side you're on, right? It just strengthens those existing viewpoints and makes the divide even bigger.
It's so scary, honestly. The way social media can just act as this, amplifier for all this.
Right.
It makes you wonder, how can anyone even try to be objective and look at things fairly in this kind of environment?
Yeah, that's the real challenge, isn't it? Trying to cut through all the noise and get to what really matters.
Absolutely, and it doesn't stop there. So Patel's facing criticism from other Democrats on the committee, too. And his response is, well, let's just say he didn't hold back.
Yeah, he definitely shifted gears. Went from defense to offense. He started directly addressing the attacks on his character and his record. It was interesting.
He used the word grotesque to describe these accusations against him. He said, if the best attacks on me are going to be false accusations and grotesque mischaracterizations, the only thing this body's doing is defeating the credibility of the men and women at the FBI.
Whoa, strong words. He's basically framing these attacks as being more than just personal. He's saying they're an attack on the FBI itself.
Exactly. Which got me thinking, is this a new strategy? This idea of taking a personal attack and making it about the whole institution, like a way to deflect and get people on your side.
It definitely raises some interesting questions about how politics are played these days. We've seen similar moves in the past, for sure. The question is, are we seeing them more and more? And what does that mean for public trust?
Okay, so Patel keeps going.
Yeah.
He starts talking about his service record, says he stood with the FBI in every theater of war, and says that these accusations of political bias are grotesquely unfair.
Yeah, that's classic, right? Appealing to patriotism, to loyalty. He's trying to build up his credibility by highlighting all his work in national security.
It seems pretty obvious he's trying to win over those undecided senators. Appeal to their sense of duty, their respect for military service. But is that going to be enough?
That's the big question, isn't it? How much will those senators care about Patel's experience and qualifications compared to all these concerns about his political connections and what he said in the past? It's a tough one.
I wonder if this whole thing of using the FBI's reputation as a shield will actually work for him. Could it backfire?
Yeah.
Could it actually hurt public trust in the FBI even more, especially if he gets confirmed?
That's definitely a possibility. If people start to see the FBI as just a pawn in a political game, it could really damage their image and how effective they are. It's a really delicate situation.
Absolutely. A lot's riding on this, not just for Patel, but for the whole FBI.
No doubt. This hearing has really brought all that to the forefront. It's high stakes, and everyone's watching to see what happens next.
Yeah, it really feels like we're watching the FBI's reputation go through the ringer in real time.
That's a great way to put it. This whole thing is forcing us to look closely at what the FBI's role is in a democracy, especially now with how divided things are politically.
Makes you think, huh? How does an institution like the FBI, whose job it is to uphold the law and protect the country, how did they handle this kind of crazy political landscape?
Right. I mean, the whole idea of the FBI is that they're impartial, nonpartisan. When people start seeing their actions or the actions of their leaders through a political lens, that's when the public starts losing trust.
And that's a scary thought for any democracy, really. You can't have a system that works if people don't trust the institutions, especially the ones in charge of law enforcement and justice.
Exactly. That's why this confirmation process is so important. We need to look beyond the political drama and think about the long-term effects this could have on the FBI and the rule of law.
Feels like we're at a turning point. Are institutions strong enough to handle this kind of intense partisan pressure? And if not, what can we as citizens do to make sure they stay independent and accountable?
Big questions, for sure, but important ones. And this hearing has definitely brought them to the forefront.
We keep coming back to this idea of the FBI's reputation and how it's being used in this whole confirmation fight. Patel's attempt to connect criticisms against him to attacks on the entire institution, that's a really interesting strategy.
Oh, it's a bold move, for sure. By saying that questioning his loyalty and accusing him of bias is undermining the entire FBI, he's basically trying to deflect the attention away from his own actions and paint his critics as being anti-FBI.
Yeah, it reminds me of that thing you see in politics all the time, where they try to turn criticism of a specific person or policy into an attack on some cherished institution or ideal.
Exactly. It's a way to avoid scrutiny and get people on your side by appealing to their emotions, their values.
So basically, Patel's saying, if you're against me, you're against the FBI and everything it stands for.
Yeah.
That's a powerful message, especially for people who see the FBI as a symbol of law and order.
It does make you wonder, though, is it fair? Is it even accurate to say that criticizing someone who's been nominated is the same as attacking the entire institution? And what happens in the long run when this kind of rhetoric is used?
It's a tricky one, right? Makes me think about the potential for manipulation. Could this tactic be used to shut down legitimate concerns and criticism, especially in such a polarized environment?
Oh, there's definitely a risk of that. If people start thinking that any criticism of the FBI is unpatriotic or even treasonous, then it becomes dangerous to even have open debate and hold people accountable.
Yeah, feels like we need to be really careful about the language being used and the stories being told, especially when it comes to institutions as important as the FBI.
I agree. It's about recognizing these rhetorical tactics and understanding how they can shape public perception. It's a big part of being an informed and critical consumer of news and information.
This is where media literacy becomes so crucial. We're constantly bombarded with information these days, and it's not always easy to tell what's real and what's fake, what's spin and what's actually true.
Yeah, being able to think critically and filter out all that noise is more important than ever.
So let's take a step back for a second. What have we learned so far? We've seen the heated exchange between Schiff and Patel, the social media frenzy it caused, and Patel's aggressive defense strategy, where he linked attacks on him to attacks on the whole FBI.
We've also talked about how this hearing reflects the deep partisan divides in our country, with each side interpreting things based on their own ideology. And we started unpacking the different rhetorical strategies being used, highlighting why critical thinking and media literacy are so important when trying to understand this complex political landscape.
This whole hearing feels like a masterclass in political maneuvering and the power of language.
Definitely. It reminds us that words matter, and they can have a huge impact on how we see events and make decisions.
This deep dive has gotten me thinking about the bigger picture. What does this hearing really tell us about the state of our democracy? What does it mean for the future of the FBI? And maybe most importantly, what should we be paying attention to as this nomination process plays out?
Those are the questions we'll keep wrestling with as we head into the final part of our deep dive. It's about connecting the dots, seeing the bigger picture, and understanding the potential consequences of the choices being made.
This is a lot to unpack, huh? This whole Patel situation.
Mm,
It really makes you think about the balance of power in our democracy and who's really accountable.
no doubt. It shows how our institutions, even the ones that seem as solid as the FBI, can be affected by this intense political polarization we're seeing.
And that's worrying. Makes you wonder how we can protect these institutions and make sure they're still following their core principles.
Yeah, it's about finding that balance,
Yeah.
respecting the authority of these institutions, but also holding them accountable when they need to be held accountable.
Right.
And it's not easy, especially now when any kind of criticism can be labeled as partisan or even un-American.
It's like what we saw with Patel
Yeah.
and how he responded to the criticism against him. Trying to connect those attacks to attacks on the whole FBI. It definitely worked to rally his supporters.
But could it backfire in the long run? That's the question. What if people start seeing the FBI as a political tool instead of an independent and impartial institution? That could really damage their credibility.
Yeah, it's almost like a self-fulfilling prophecy. The more these institutions get dragged into the political arena, the more their reputations get hurt, and the harder it is for them to actually do their jobs.
That's the danger. And it's not just the FBI. We're seeing this happen with other institutions, too, like the courts, the media.
It's something we should all be concerned about, no matter what your political views are. A healthy democracy needs strong, independent institutions that can do their jobs without being influenced by politics.
So what can we do to protect these institutions? Well, I think it starts with being informed and engaged. We need to understand what these institutions do, what challenges they face, and why it's so important to hold them accountable.
And we need to be critical thinkers when we're consuming information. We need to be able to spot the tactics being used to manipulate public opinion and call it out when we see it.
And maybe most important of all, we need to be able to talk to each other even when we disagree. Find common ground, build bridges, work together to make our institutions stronger and protect our democracy.
Well said. That's a great point to end on.
Hmm.
So as we wrap up our deep dive into Schiff-Patel's confirmation hearing, we'll leave you with this thought. The future of our democracy depends on all of us working together to uphold the rule of law, protect our institutions, and have thoughtful and respectful conversations with each other.
It's not easy, but it's crucial, and it's something we all need to be a part of. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.